Okay, I think we are good to go. Distinguished delegates, colleagues, partners, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all joining us from different parts of the world. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to this stakeholder briefing on the launch preparations for the UN Decade of Sustainable Transport 2026 to 2035. This briefing is being organized by the Division for Sustainable Development Goals of the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs. And we are also very glad to have several partners joining us for the substantive discussions today. My name is Nayara Costa, and I am a Senior Sustainable Development Officer with the Outreach and Partnership Branch of the SDG DESA, and it's a privilege to be your moderator for today's session. So this webinar marks an important milestone in our collective journey toward the upcoming UN Decade for Sustainable Transport, an initiative designed to accelerate progress towards safe, affordable, accessible, and environmentally sound transport systems that advance the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Today's discussions will focus on the road towards the official launch and the implementation plan, highlighting how diverse stakeholders can contribute to making this decade a success. So before we start, let me just go through a few quick points. This briefing is being recorded. The recording and all relevant information will be shared via email to all stakeholders registered to this event. Also, we have asked our speakers, they will be keeping their cameras on when they are speaking. Also, for the participants, we kindly ask you to use the Q&A box if you have any comments, any questions and suggestions. You can also vote on questions that are more relevant for you and that you would like our panelists to discuss. My colleagues will also be posting relevant links on the chat box, so please keep an eye on there for the links. So just a quick overview of our agenda. We will start with an overview of the process for the development of the implementation plan for the UN Decade of Sustainable Transport. This will be led by DESA. After that, we'll be moving into a panel discussion to be moderated by our partners at SLOCAT. And we are really, really grateful to have Lisa and with us, and also for all her support and collaboration in setting up this session. And the panel will be featuring perspectives from a diverse group of outstanding stakeholders that are actively advancing sustainable transport solutions. We'll have a session for Q&A. Again, please use the Q&A box so we can track your comments and questions. And then we'll close with some closing remarks. So before further ado, I am really pleased to invite my colleague, Astra Bonini. She's the Chief of the Integrated Policy Analysis Branch at the Division for Sustainable Development Goals in UNDESA. Astra, please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Nayara. Welcome, all colleagues. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We're really thrilled that you're all taking the time to join us and learn more about the upcoming UN Decade of Sustainable Transport and how you can be engaged in this process. Many of you are familiar faces and have been engaged. Others were really excited to have a chance to reach out and brief you on the upcoming decade and all of the activities. Just to start, this group, I think, will fully agree that transport is a crucial enabler for economic growth, for poverty eradication, for addressing climate change, and really for achieving progress across all of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Last month, when world leaders met in New York City for the UN General Assembly, and for the climate summit, the SDG moment, there was really an emphasis on the next 5 years and beyond to find solutions to the challenges that the world faces and scale up impact across many different areas of sustainable development. And in that context, transport continues to stand out as a critical enabler for cross-cutting progress. And that's something that we really want to emphasize in the lead up to the decade and during the decade, that advances in sustainable transport provide exactly the type of synergetic solutions that leaders are calling for, that can, in some ways, do more with less. The impact of investing in sustainable transport, whether it's new zero carbon fuels, innovations in urban planning, resilient and smart infrastructure, or the use of emerging technologies to align freight and passenger mobility with social, economic, and environmental sustainability. There's really a chance to have a high level of impact if we look at sustainable transport as a solution area. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of background on the mandate for the UN decade. In 2023, UN member states in the General Assembly recognized the importance of sustainable transport in a resolution that was titled "Strengthening the Links Between All Modes of Transport to Achieve the Sustainable Development Goals." The resolution really highlighted some of these ways that transport can be impactful across all of the pillars of sustainable development. And it pointed toward a United Nations decade. It called for a United Nations decade of sustainable transport to commence in January 2026, extending through 2035. The resolution provided additional opportunities for collaboration, highlighting the UN Day of Sustainable Transport that happens every year on November 26th, and pointing to the potential for a UN conference on sustainable transport. But it really focused on setting up this decade that we're all talking about that's coming up. To ensure careful planning and preparation, coordination before the decade begins, the General Assembly requested that an implementation plan for the decade be prepared by the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs in collaboration with the UN Regional Economic Commissions, and also in consultation with UN member states, intergovernmental organizations, and all other relevant stakeholders. This approach was requested to ensure that the decade was informed by diverse voices and experiences, given the multitude of ways that transport connects to all pillars of sustainable development. So really grounded in an understanding that a successful decade would need to be informed by many voices and experiences. Next slide, please. So just to go over a little bit of what has happened since this resolution was passed in fall of 2023. The request is for this implementation plan and the preparations for the decade to be delivered within existing resources. And so DESA has really made an effort to leverage all opportunities to engage with different groups and stakeholders. And in hindsight, I think it's been a very productive engagement, and we've had a chance to connect with many of you through different activities that have taken place throughout the time, and really just to benefit from the great support of what we have found as an extremely active transport community, both within the United Nations, amongst member states, and with other stakeholders as well. So a few activities. The first kind of kickoff event was a high-level meeting on sustainable transport that was convened in April of 2024 by the President of the General Assembly. And this really provided a good starting point for understanding what some of the key issues were, challenges, how transport can be an avenue to accelerate progress in sustainable development. We then followed that meeting by organizing an informal consultation at UN headquarters 1 year ago, last October, where we invited the full membership of the UN to come together and discuss some of the concerns that member states might have that they would like to see addressed during the decade. And then in follow-up to that, we organized a side event at the HLPF this past July to again convene member states to look at the annotated outline for the plan to get some feedback on whether the plan was on track to address some of the key issues. We've also coordinated very closely with our UN transport colleagues across the system, and many entities have contributed to the work, including through events such as ones we held at COP29 and which are upcoming at COP30 to focus on synergies between sustainable transport and climate action. We've also leveraged the opportunity to engage with member states and stakeholders at the International Transport Forum in Germany and the World Bank's gathering on transforming transportation. We've organized a couple of workshops and events focused on capacity building, both in LLDCs, landlocked developing countries, and with participants from other developing countries, just to make sure that the plan is addressing the critical issues that those countries experience that really can benefit from sustainable transport. And then, of course, we've engaged heavily with the regional commissions throughout the process, having a working group that meets fairly regularly, and also benefiting from events at the regional level and consultations that the regional commissions have held, really understanding that sustainable transport may look different in different regions, and the issues that different regions are facing in terms of transport may be different. So we're very much trying to make sure that those are reflected across the implementation plan. All of the outcomes of the regional consultations and this work are available on the implementation plan website. So you can also find this timeline and additional resources on all of these activities. Next slide, please. A key mechanism for outreach was a global online stakeholder consultation that generated quite a large number of inputs to the plan. This was launched last year in late November, and it was complemented by a dedicated global multi-stakeholder webinar on World Sustainable Transport Day of 2024. And we'd like to thank many of the organizations here today on the call that submitted inputs through this call. We were extremely pleased because we received over almost 115 inputs from 43 countries. Notably, over 42% of the inputs were submitted by organizations operating in Africa, and we received many inputs from smaller NGOs in developing countries. So we were very pleased to have inputs coming from stakeholders that we hadn't had a chance to reach out to in any of the events that had been held yet. And truly, these inputs have enriched the implementation plan and really helped to ensure that it considers sustainable transport opportunities and challenges from as wide a range of perspectives as possible. The full synthesis report of the inputs is available on our implementation plan website. You can scan the QR code to access that. And it's really a rich synthesis of many different inputs and viewpoints coming in on sustainable transport. Next slide, please. So moving toward the implementation plan, which through this consultative process, we've really been able to gather so many insights and so many valuable inputs. And of course, at the end, these all need to be brought together in the form of an implementation plan that can inform the UN Decade for Sustainable Transport. So there is now a draft available. It is focused in several focus areas that we started to see coming through a lot of the discussions and inputs, and really tries to frame the decade by providing a shared vision on how sustainable transport can contribute to sustainable development, very broadly speaking, and also a call for action on what can be done in the decade to scale up the impact of sustainable transport across sustainable development. We also hope that the implementation plan can be a tool for raising awareness about transport's importance for the SDGs and fostering and initiating new projects, investments, initiatives, and partnerships, giving the space for different actors to come together. There's also a emphasis on trying to enhance coordination in the area of transport, both within the UN, but also across the transport sector, looking at different modes at both passenger and freight transport, and really helping to sustain and hopefully increase political momentum for action in sustainable transport. The implementation plan aims to address transport in a balanced manner. If there's a sector that cuts across so many different areas, transport really does. And we want to make sure that the plan addresses all sectors, from maritime, inland transport, and aviation, and of course, both passenger and freight transport. And so it looks at 6 areas that are in the outline here. Ensuring access to sustainable transport for all, advancing low carbon resilient and environmentally sound transport systems, enhancing efficiency and promoting sustainable connectivity and logistics, shaping people-centered urban mobility and livable cities, making transport safe and secure, and leveraging science, technology, and innovation for sustainable transport. So through these focus areas, the plan puts forward specific suggestions for policy innovations, partnerships, actions, and also tries to emphasize the interlinkages that can be leveraged throughout the decade by looking at how these tools can help simultaneously tackle issues such as climate change, road safety, air pollution, health, access, and affordability, all at the same time. Next slide, please. The draft implementation plan, as many of you know, is under review, and we truly welcome your feedback on the draft as we aim to ensure that it captures all of the ways that sustainable transport can drive progress on the SDGs. So we have created a form where inputs can be contributed to the process. We're looking to receive these by the 31st of October. So there's a little bit of time left, a couple of weeks. But if you would like to send in some reflections on how the plan is shaping up, how it addresses some of the issues that you truly believe need to be incorporated into the plan, we absolutely welcome the feedback and look forward to continuing to benefit from your knowledge and engagement. Next slide, please. We're also, of course, looking ahead to the decade, and we're aware that the implementation plan is really just the start. So as we move toward the beginning of the decade in 2026, we really want to encourage action, commitments from every member state, organization, individual, funder, company, and change maker. So we've organized a call for commitments to sustainable transport that will then be recorded in an online registry with select commitments possibly highlighted at the launch event of the implementation plan on 10 December. We encourage these initiatives to be new or represent a significant scaling up of an existing successful effort, to be forward-looking and advance progress on sustainable transport, to follow the principles of the UN Charter, and to be specific, measurable achievements, resource-based, and with time-based deliverables. And we also encourage these to be proposed by a single entity or a coalition and open to additional participants. And again, some of these commitments will be highlighted throughout the UN decade and also at the 10 December launch of the implementation plan and the UN decade. Next slide, please. And I will wrap up because I know we have exciting panelists ahead. Finally, I just want to mention the launch of the decade in the implementation plan, which will take place 10 December from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. in the ECOSOC chamber at UN headquarters in New York. The launch will feature a high-level opening, a showcase of commitments that have been input through the call for commitments, and then a roundtable dialogue to try to really allow different voices to speak about the impact that the decade will have. Registration is going to be open on 30th of October and will close on the 2nd of December. So we encourage you all to register and join to put sustainable transport at the center of discussions about sustainable development. We would love to have you join and share your ideas, connect with partners, and really coming together to drive change as we look ahead to the decade of sustainable transport. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Astra, for that insightful overview. Colleagues, to all those attending, my colleague Danielle has been posting all the links, the relevant links. So please take your time to go through them, to review. If you have specific questions for Astra, please feel free to drop them on the chat, the Q&A box, and we are going to be reviewing your questions there as well. So now let's move forward to the panel and hear perspectives from key stakeholders working to make transport systems more sustainable, inclusive, and resilient. We are really pleased to count on SLOCAT collaboration today, not only today, but in the whole framing and thinking for this webinar. And I want to invite Ms. Lisa Castillo. She's Senior Director, Knowledge Management and Performance at the SLOCAT Partnership, and she will be moderating the session. So Lisa, over to you to introduce our speakers.
Thank you so much, Nayara. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. On behalf of SLOCAT, it's a genuine pleasure to welcome you to this session. My name is Lisa Castillo. I'd like to begin by thanking Astra, Rina, Nayara, and other DESA colleagues for their efforts in collaborating in the UN implementation plan and engaging stakeholders in the process. The UN Decade presents a unique opportunity to foster inclusive, coordinated, and transformative progress to strengthen transport systems and services that are socially inclusive, economically viable, and environmentally responsible and resilient. With many transport systems in low and middle income countries still developing, the next decade, it's a decisive window to avoid inefficient investments and costly retrofits. Today's panel brings together voices from organizations delivering work related to different interlinked focus areas that are identified in the draft UN implementation plan of this UN Decade of Sustainable Transport. We will be hearing from Kalpana Vishwanath, co-founder and chief executive officer of SafetyPin, on ensuring universal access to sustainable transport. Mr. Mac Mayer, senior director of strategy at CUNY Climate Center, on advancing low carbon resilient transport systems. Sonal Shah, executive director of Center of Sustainable and Equitable Cities and Urban Catalyst, and Ambibola Akenjo, managing director and CEO of the Lagos Metropolitan Area Transport Authority, on shaping center urban mobility and livable cities. Thank you to all our panelists for your expertise and leadership. And Kalpana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you to UN DESA, and I think, and thank you to SLOCAT for having me as part of this panel. Many of us have been part of different processes leading up to this draft document, and so I think we're all quite excited working in the sector of sustainable mobility and transport and inclusive mobility, how this is going to really sort of have a synergy with many of the existing SDGs, whether it's on SDG 11 or ending poverty or gender equity. We know building partnerships because we really know that sustainable transport and mobility are key to driving social, economic, political, cultural participation in all of our cities and countries. And I'm happy to speak about very briefly about the area of inclusive, or being inclusive. And I think it is really significant that the document on sustainable transport right up front foregrounds the issue of inclusivity. And this inclusivity to me has several aspects. One which Astra spoke about, I think is very interesting, is to really look at the different kinds of mobility and transport, because often many of us work in silos. We're either working in passenger transport or maritime or other forms of transport, or even the back end of freight and others. And I think a document that brings together all these different elements, water transport, air transport, is an important one for us to begin to engage across sectors, even within our areas of work. For example, our focus, my focus, both at Safety Pin and the Women on the Move network, which is an Asian network of more than 2,000 women and gender experts, is really on how to include women's voices in this. And therefore, I think the leave no one behind, which is the second element of inclusion, which this document is very strongly, which is part of all, I think, UN documents, but this document continues to have an emphasis on this. And this, we're looking across, I think, regions. And I think that's an important one when we look at whether it's Asia, whether it's Africa, whether it's Latin America, Europe, North America. We know that the levels of sustainability, levels of inclusion are quite varied. And I think that it is important to learn from each other and to sort of share good practices in others. And then we have the whole area of, I think, who are we designing transport for? What does sustainable transport mean when you link it to issues of migration, poverty, gender inequities, and other realities of people's lives? And how do we begin to make sure that sustainability builds on the experience of the most vulnerable in our cities and our countries, in the rural areas, in order to ensure that development becomes more equitable? Because we are seeing globally that while there has been economic growth, there has been a much sort of inequity growth as well within countries and between countries. And I think transport can play a very important role in beginning to reduce these inequities among countries and regions. And I think that's why having a full decade and a full document focusing on this. While just my last point is to say that when we look at transport, we're looking and we say equitable transport and inclusive transport. What are we saying? We are talking about safety for all in many ways, both in terms of road safety for people who are walking and bicycling, but also in terms of safety from sexual harassment for women and other people of other genders who use public transport and public spaces, accessibility for the most marginalized, for people with disabilities, for children, for elder people. Affordability, I think that's another very important area that we have when we talk about inclusion. How do we make sure that transport is affordable, reliable, and seamless? So I think the important things here are really to see that all of these have to be seen together so that inclusion doesn't just become like a catchword, but we really understand inclusion as addressing inequities among populations, among regions, within countries, within different forms of mobility and transport. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kalpana, for those valuable insights. Just a quick reminder that we can use the chat box for questions, and please indicate who the question is for. We now welcome Mark Mayer. Mark, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lisa. Really a pleasure for me to be joining the webinar today. I've spent 30 years working on sustainable transport, and it's really exciting now to see the decade taking shape and the implementation plan. It's really energizing for me, and I'm very optimistic about what we can achieve through the decade. I'd like to thank the UN for the transparent process that they've run. And the multiple chances to contribute. I managed to contribute to one of the in-person sessions, and the written contributions, and I'm certainly going to contribute in this final open round as well now. So that's very grateful for that. And I see a number of dimensions where the decade can really help us advance on low carbon, resilient, and environmentally sound transport systems. The first one relates to this massive number of different types of stakeholders that we need to take action at multiple levels, national, international, local, corporate, community levels, public and private, mandatory action, voluntary action, urban action, rural action, action on passengers and freight, across the avoid, shift and improve on the demand side and so on. So we need a multiplicity of action to make this happen. And I think the decade and the implementation plan can provide a framework and a direction to energize and guide this mass movement we need. And this momentum is essential, not just because of the scale of action we need, for example, to tackle the climate crisis through emissions mitigation, but also momentum attracts political attention. And that's also important, and it's also essential for attracting private investment at scale. So the framework of the decade and the implementation plan can help us create this energy, this momentum to get the political attention and the private investment we need, something that is essential for the transformation at scale. Now, I also think that the call that Astra Bonini mentioned, the call for action, is also another opportunity, is that by making a public commitment, you're not only giving visibility to your own work, sharing your ideas with others, and possibly finding new partners, but you're also encouraging others to take action. And I think this is another great way that the decade can help us create this momentum that we need. Certainly here at the Kuna Foundation, it's really encouraged us to think more about our work in the years ahead, and we're planning to make 1 or 2 public commitments to contribute to the decade. So this is another way to create momentum. Now, while we all recognize that we need a multiplicity of action from many, many types of stakeholders, we need to recognize that the member states have a primordial role. And they can provide the national frameworks to incentivize and align actors in their countries. And here the key thing is coherence, policy coherence. Transport touches on land use, on energy, on health, on climate, on education. It touches on anything, and it's only if countries can provide a coherent policy framework that they can guide this multiplicity of action. And I think that the decade can draw attention to this importance and encourage member states to bring forward these integrated development plans. I think that's key. But I also want to say that, of course, not all countries will attend to this topic, and some countries may well work against this agenda. But I am really convinced that they will pay the price. Efficient, safe, clean and resilient transport is essential for economic development. High costs, delays, pollution, inequality, lack of access are a recipe for failure. And I think we can already see this. Show me a city with chronic road congestion and I will show you a failing city, a place that's unattractive to live, work or invest. So I think we need to really be confident in this agenda and not be captured by these negative forces. The last thing I want to say is I appreciate very much the multimodal aspect of the implementation plan. This was mentioned before, which helps us break down these traditional modal silos that prevent us really getting to the efficient integrated system we need. And also it pays attention to not only thinking about the infrastructure, but the other crucial elements of the system we need: institutions, workers, vehicles, ancillary systems. This is really... The last thing I want to say is that the decade, by its very nature, lasting 10 years, makes us think ahead. And I think this is another important thing to do. Not just, it's a significant task to take on the current transformations that we need to make sure the system works for everyone and no one is left behind. But the decade encourages us to look ahead and see the opportunities for transport to support the broader transformations: the circular economy, the aging population, rapid urbanization, integration of new digital tools. So this is another opportunity to re-energize the action that we want to see towards advancing low carbon, resilient and environmentally sound transport systems. Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks so much, Mark. Now we welcome Sonal Sa. Sonal, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. I just want to congratulate you and Dessa, Astra, and Rina for creating a very engaging process I had the opportunity through the Urban Catalyst to contribute at various stages of the implementation plan, both in offline and in online consultations. And thank you to SLOCAT for giving me an opportunity to share some of my perspectives on the implementation plan. Today, as we know that 55% of the world's population resides in cities, which is expected to grow to 68% or 7 billion by 2050. 90% of this growth is expected to take place in Asia and Africa. Cities, which are crucibles of economic growth, are also plagued, as the implementation plan highlights, by very poor air quality, road safety, fragmented urban governance, and environmental degradation. We also see that women's labor force participation rate globally in the age group of 25 to 54 years is only 61% compared to 91% for men. And women's participation in the labor force is also impacted by the availability of transportation, and this is estimated to be 16.5%. So what would it take to have people-centered mobility and livable cities? One is building, as the implementation plan also highlights, what we call AXAR public transport systems. These are affordable, connected, safe, accessible, and reliable, as well as recognizing the crucial role of informal or popular transport. We know that integrated urban planning, along with transportation networks, will be key, but we also need contextual approaches to transit-oriented development that range from upgrading informal settlements in near transit, along with strategic redevelopment that emphasize affordable housing, public amenities, and parks. A key aspect that we have noticed, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic, is the role of care work and how we can design cities that acknowledge the mobility of care, as well as designing cities around care, a big part of which is unpaid and borne by women. As many cities grow, there is a need for us to manage the demand along with manage supply as well as travel demand. Parking caps, low parking minimums, on-street parking management, and congestion pricing can be effective strategies to manage travel demand. I think we really, especially in some of the cities, both in the global south and in the north, would benefit from this. And lastly, as the implementation plan also highlights this, there is a need for inclusive and participatory planning processes to create a coordinated urban governance, because this holds key for effective implementation and monitoring. I'd just like to highlight these pieces as a potential way for us to create cities that are livable, and for this decade to be known as the decade of sustainable and inclusive transport. Thank you.
Absolutely, Sonal. Thank you so much. Now for our final panelist intervention, we welcome Ambibola. Over to you. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Lisa. I hope you can hear me.
Very well. Loud and clear.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to join this webinar and to share my penny's worth of what I see, how we can drive this decade of sustainable transportation. I think it is a fantastic initiative by the UN. And when I look at just taking off from where Sonal spoke, talking about the growth that will occur in the world and where 90% of that will happen in both Africa and Asia, it then says, without too much thought, that both of those continents must embrace this concept of sustainable urban, decade of sustainable transportation. Now, from an Africa perspective, bearing in mind what I do, which is more about intra-city transportation and moving around a large population. Lagos has over 22 million people. We have started to realize that sustainability is no longer a word that we can bandy around, but it must be implemented in the systems that we build so that it can we can move from talk to action. And to that end, there's a lot of work that is going on within African cities, actually. Recently, we had sort of like a sustainability urban mobility conference where various cities came together to understand how we can participate and partake in this decade to ensure that we move our cities forward in the same perspective. Now, when we look at what the implementation plan is talking about, we're saying, especially when we're thinking about logistics and people movement, ensuring that there is a connectivity that affects and ensures we have sustainable movement. When we look at where we are currently and what we need to do, there's so many things we have to look at. There are ways in which Lagos, for instance, is ensuring that we're using digitalization to move our stock as it comes in from the ports, so that we're not congesting our roads. And there are ways in which we're now having e-call-up systems that has been committed to by Lagos. And that will ensure that when we're moving stuff out of the ports, it is coordinated, it is digitally recognized and registered, and it is controlled in that way. That way, for us, we reduce emissions by ensuring that we don't have trucks loitering, and we know when trucks are being moved and how they must move, and how quickly we can get them out. Now, there are other ways in which we change. We look at emissions, and we're ensuring here to from moving our goods out of our ports, we're changing modes. Railway systems are being planned to ensure that we have a different mode, a more sustainable mode of transportation out of our ports. And from that perspective, we're continuing to think digitalizing our solutions, ensuring that they are more sustainable by changing fueling. So we're moving away from diesel trucks, we're moving into electrified and gas trucks. And those things will then reduce the gas emissions the GHG emissions that are being put out onto our streets, and especially the communities around the areas where we are carrying out this. Now, when we're also talking about interconnectivity, and I think that is a big thing for Africa, especially for Lagos, when I look at what we're doing. Connectivity ensures that we are efficient in the work that we do. Implementing our infrastructure to support connectivity between modes will reduce the levels of emissions, not just by changing fueling, but also by making those connectivities efficient for us. And those are part of the implementation aspects that has been indicated within the implementation plan for the UN decade. So let's just say, for us, the sustainability mode must speak to an equitable transport system for the people. Climate action will also be taken into consideration, and obviously economic viability. Thank you.
Thank you, Abimbola. What a wonderful work you're doing. Thank you to all our panelists for this inspiring and actionable insights. What we heard today reinforced a critical message. Through adequate and coordinated policy and investment efforts, robust in monitoring, open access, data platforms, multi-stakeholder collaboration, and peer-to-peer learning, the next 10 years can bring tangible, transformative change across all modes of transport and reduce regional disparities. If harnessed effectively, These 10 years can leave a lasting legacy of social inclusive, economically viable, environmentally responsible, and resilient transport systems for shared prosperity well beyond 2035. Thank you for your attention. And now I'll hand over to Nayara for the questions and answer sessions. Nayara, over to you.
Thank you so very much, Lisa, and to all our amazing panelists. It's one thing that really resonates is how the process and this sense of ownership of the plan. This is the sense that I got from your interventions, that you see yourselves, your priorities, and your work as well reflected in somehow in the implementation plan. And as Mark was mentioning, generating this momentum that can lead towards political attention and action as well. So thank you so very much to all of you for joining and for being partners throughout this process. Before I open, I'm gonna go to, we are gonna do the Q&A now. A few things, just a reminder. The recording of this session will be available, will be uploaded to our page. We'll be adding the PowerPoint presentation as well to the website, to the webinars website. So you can check again, you can revisit, you can review. I want to point to the Q&A box, and let me thank my colleague Rina for all her comments and her efforts in responding live to the questions. If I may, I think I see kind of three sets of questions that are very related to the implementation plan. One of them, it's talking about the launching on the 10th of December, which is going to happen here in the UN headquarters in New York. And then there was a question about participation. So everybody who has a valid UN grounds pass, so it's a blue badge, you can come in, you'll be able to access the room up to the capacity of the room, and we really hope it will be a completely full room on that day. If you do not have a badge valid for New York, there will be a registration process. So colleagues, you will have the opportunity to do so. We'll soon, there's already some information up there, so you can prepare for the registration. As Astra mentioned, it opens on the 30th of October. And all participants are responsible for all costs related to their travel, including as well visas as needed. Maybe I could see if Astra has her camera up, and then Astra, because I think I have two questions that are more directed to you. And one refers to the commitments. So I think there is a question about how big the commitment needs to be, if there is any additional guidance you could share about the commitments. And I think there is also a sense of after the launch, what would be the next steps and how can stakeholders continue engaged in this process? So Astra, apologies for putting you on the spotlight, but I wonder if you could respond to those.
No, thank you, Nair. These are, first of all, thank you to the panelists, because really excellent points were made. And I think it reflects the multitude of perspectives that we're trying to include in the process leading toward the decade. Really excellent questions in the chat also, and many thanks to Rina for providing some answers to those. Rina's really been a driving force connecting all of you to the transport decade and substantively and organizationally. With the call for commitments, we're looking for new initiatives, or at least a significant scaling up of existing initiatives. So we're really trying to use this call for commitments to prompt new actions and to mobilize new commitments during the decade. Given that it is a decade, the commitment should be forward-looking and aim to advance progress on sustainable development if they can drive. I think the concept of interlinkages has come up several times in the discussions, and we're hoping that some of these commitments can be framed in ways that are cross-cutting. So they're really pushing forward progress in a number of different areas of sustainable development. They should be specific and measurable so that results can be highlighted throughout the decade and with a time-based focus on the deliverables so that throughout the decade we can try to highlight some of these initiatives that have been very successful and how they've been impactful on advancing sustainable transport. In terms of the scale, we know that we have stakeholders who have differing levels of resources, differing levels of networks and partnerships, and we really want to encourage all types of stakeholders to make these commitments, from member states to a small NGO to research centers to the philanthropy area and private sector and beyond. So there's not a specific criteria in terms of the size. We just want to encourage widespread engagement in the commitment. So encourage and on the website, I think there was a link in the slides. You can find out more information about the call that may answer some of these questions and present a little bit more detail on the criteria. Thank you, Naira.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Asra and colleagues. So we have a few more minutes to go. Oh, and I also appreciate the participants reacting to our panel and to the webinar. Thank you so much for engaging. Since we have a few minutes, I want to propose the following to our panelists, because one of the questions is what is coming after the launch. And since you have engaged so much, and I think you also mentioned how relevant it is, do you already have plans moving forward? How do you plan on engaging with the decade moving forward? If you have any plans already, so do not, if you don't know, no worries. But maybe, Lisa, I'll end with you. But if Dr. Kalpana is still online, if you would also share with us, it's 30 seconds or 1 minute, and yeah.
Yeah, thank you. As I mentioned, that in addition to being part of Safety Pin, we are also the Secretariat for the Women on the Move Asia Network, of which many people are members. And I think as a network, it might be interesting. We have reached out to the network to say, how would they like to engage? So I think what we would like to play the role is to engage a larger set of people to look at the document, come up with commitments, see how they'd like to be part of it, and have more of a collective and stronger voice towards this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kalpana. Mark, would you share some ideas?
Yeah, so we're looking at making a commitment to an annual global logistics sustainability survey. So we think there's a whole tracking part of the decade, and a lot of that will be based on public sources of information about the supply of transport. And we want to complement that with perspectives from the logistics decision makers on progress in their region towards sustainable logistics. And we're planning to make a commitment to do that every year for 10 years, so we can track trends over time, but also compare regions by surveying logistic decision makers both on the demand side and on the supply side. We think this will be a valuable addition to support discussion around sustainable logistics and contribute to the tracking of the decade.
Thank you so much, Mark. This is really inspiring. So I hope the others can also get a sense of ideas you can bring to your commitments as well. So now.
Yeah, thanks, Naira. I think a critical piece at this point will be how the call to action gets localized at the national and at the city levels. We see many of the areas of our work reflected in the plan as well. And I think one of the goals that we hope to work towards is seeing how we can bring some of the actions into commitments at the national and local level. So really looking forward to that.
Thank you so much. So now, yeah, indeed, this will make a huge difference for the implementation of the decade commitments. So Engineer Abimbola Akinajo?
Thank you very much. I think for us, one of the things that we found is that, and I think that was alluded to earlier about smart and measurable outcomes. So one of the things we have committed to doing is to, regardless of what we do, and we end up doing a lot of work, but we now need to begin to be deliberate about ensuring we reduce our carbon emissions, our GHG emissions, and air quality. So as a city, and for all the work we're doing, we're now committing to having a framework that will be able to measure. And so we can now begin to populate and make available data that indicates the reductions that we are effecting through the work that we're doing in GHG emissions. And obviously that translates to air quality, and it translates to health of the people and all of that. So beyond movement, we're really quite keen on ensuring that air quality is something that we not only reduce, but we actually are able to measure and demonstrate reductions in that. And that's a commitment that we're keying into this decade with.
Thank you so much, Engineer Akinajo, to all the speakers. I will now invite Lisa, because I'm sure Slokat has a lot planned as well.
Thank you, Nayara. Very briefly, because I'm conscious of the time, we are working around an initiative around the Transport, Climate and Sustainability Global Status Report, the 5th edition. We are launching the 4th edition, but we are ambition to make this multi-stakeholder platform for knowledge, data, and analysis in the service of the decade's monitoring and reporting framework.
Thank you, Lisa. So to all our participants, thank you so very much. Thank you for joining. Thank you for your questions. Thank you also for your commitment and for getting inspired by the discussions today. Let me express my deepest appreciation to our panelists, Dr. Kalpana Viswanath, Mr. Mark Major, Ms. Sonal Shah, and Engineer Abimbola Akinajo. Also, and especially to Lisa Castillo from Slokat for the amazing collaboration in the organization of this event and for skillfully moderating our panel today. I want to take this opportunity to thank my dear colleague Asra Bonini for her leadership in this process, and especially as well to my colleague Rina Yusila. She is behind the scenes, but you all know her already, and she is also the engine pushing this agenda here. And also to my colleagues behind the scenes, Justin and Danielle, for support. So as we move forward toward the launch of the UN Decade of Sustainable Transport, your engagement and collaboration will be essential in shaping an inclusive, low-emission and resilient transport future. The recording of today's webinar and all related materials will be made available on the event website. And on behalf of UNDESA, I thank you all once again for your time, for your partnership, and for your commitment. The event is now closed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.